Hi, and welcome to everybody who's joined us here in Yerevan in person and to all of you watching online for this session about critical raw materials unlocking their potential. My name is David Shukman. For many years I was BBC News science editor, and when I look at this topic I can't think of a more fascinating intersection of different agendas. We've got the pressing urgency of climate change, fueling the demand for a zero carbon transition, leading to the demand for all kinds of different materials. We've got industrial involvement, the involvement of the mining industry. We've got the whole question of natural resources, geopolitics, as with any transition, when new materials are suddenly in hot demand, that starts to shift things in a very interesting way internationally. There are questions of environmental responsibility and human rights as well. So it's an extraordinary package, complicated but fascinating. And I'm sure, during the course of the next hour, we will pick this apart and shine some very valuable light on this extraordinarily important topic. I'm going to introduce our panel in a moment. Before I do, you'll all be familiar with Slido. We're very keen to hear your observations and to see your questions. You know the score with Slido. There it is, appearing on the screen. You can point your camera at the QR code or go onto slido.com and enter that code number. And during the course of the event, I'll be checking on the iPad here for the questions that you submit, and we'll try to get to those, as many as we can, towards the end of the session. Next, let me invite to the stage to give us a kind of introduction to the whole theme of the session, Natalia Lakozana, who is Director of Natural Resources at the EBRD. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Good afternoon to our esteemed panelists and guests. Welcome to a discussion that will hopefully electrify the room. The unlocking of potential for minerals and metals that are of high economic importance and face potential supply risks, the critical raw materials, or CRM. As we navigate the complexities of the global economy and strive for sustainable development, the indispensable role of CRMs in this process cannot be overstated. Over the past 30 years, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has been at the forefront of supporting the mining sector in our countries of operations. With investments totaling some 3 billion euros in 70 projects across 14 commodities, some of which are now considered to be critical or strategic, including copper, lithium, manganese, and nickel, our commitment to supporting this sector is unwavering. Bank support to the mining sector has three main components. First of all, it's access to finance. We provide access to a full range of financial instruments, from debt project finance to equity investments. Secondly, we offer technical assistance and capacity buildings to our clients in the mining sector in a number of areas, from resource efficiency and waste management to helping them to decarbonize, as well as improve inclusiveness and gender in their operations. And lastly, we work closely with the governments to modernize the mining sector by improving regulation and the business environment to facilitate investments in the sector and implementation of best practices in the mining sector as well. At the EBRD, we recognize the pivotal role of critical raw materials in powering innovation and ensuring resilience and decarbonization of the key sectors of the economy. As a result, we have formulated a robust mining strategy that focusing and is shaped by dual focus, harnessing the economic potential of critical raw materials while safeguarding environmental integrity and social welfare. Concluding, by developing the economic potential of critical raw materials while maintaining our commitment to environmental and social considerations, we aim to foster a future where innovation thrives and communities prosper. With that, I'm passing back the floor to David. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia. Thank you. Thank you. Let me now introduce our panel, and as I go along the row of seats here, I'm going to ask each of them to make a very, very brief 1-minute comment about why this subject is such a big deal for them. I'm going to start with you, Commissioner. Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis, you're the European Commission's Executive Vice President for an economy that works for people and the EU Trade Commissioner. Great to have you with us. Very briefly, why is this subject such a big deal?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank EBRD for organizing this debate on critical raw materials. And indeed, it's now very topical as countries are engaging in a transition towards carbon neutral economies. And this green and digital economies will require a different set of inputs than the classical economy, which was reliant on fossil fuels. So correspondingly, why it's important, first we need to increase investment to ramp up current and future production of critical raw materials. We need to diversify currently very concentrated supply chains in a number of critical raw materials. We need to do it in an environmentally and socially sustainable way. And also we need to do in a way which is mutually beneficial for both countries which actually need those critical raw materials and resource-rich countries. So I think it's going to be a very important topic. It already is in years ahead.
Thank you, and obviously touching multiple different agendas there. Let me now introduce Duka Begjayev, your Chief Financial Officer of the massive copper mine that Rio Tinto operates in Mongolia. And I was delighted to read, Duka, that you are the first Mongolian to qualify with an MBA from Wharton Business School. Did I get that right? I think that's something to be immensely proud of. When you think of this subject, that suddenly your mine in Mongolia, there's a lot of talk about it globally. How does it feel to be suddenly the center of attention?
Thank you very much, David, for that. And believe me, I did not, expect that introduction. So, of course, it's actually quite exciting for us to be. And let me tell you why. OT, Oyu Tolgoi, or OT as we call it, it's the largest copper and gold mine in the country. We are building what's soon to be the largest, one of the largest copper mines in the world. We just commenced the underground operations last year, and I want to thank EBRD for enabling that. It's not just only building the copper mine in Mongolia. It is also a truly nation-building project, and that's what really excites me. We expect to be, contributing something like up to 30% of the country's GDP. Yeah? So it's monumental. It's the biggest ever investment in the country, together with 20,500 workforce. We are building it, and it's largely Mongolian workforce. It's 97% of our workforce is, Mongolians, including myself. And the reason it's exciting is because, I'm a mother of 3. I feel like, this project, the development of OT, will really spur the growth of the country. And that's what really excites me. I'm excited because I feel like I'm contributing to the development of the country for the better, to leave the better country for my children and for generations ahead.
Thank you. That's very heartfelt, and it's great to hear you describe that. And we'll come back to your points in more detail in our discussion. Next along the line is Minister Kanat Shalapayev. He's Minister of Industry and Construction at the Republic of Kazakhstan. It's good to have you with us. Kazakhstan is suddenly, I've read, in this extraordinary position of, I think, have you got 18 of the critical raw materials that are on the EU's most wanted list? I mean, you're suddenly at hot demand as well.
I think let me just expand on that point, and I think Executive Vice President Dombrovskis, we seem to meet very regularly on that subject lately, and indeed we have a very strong foundation for cooperation between the European Union, the United States, and the other countries in terms of the critical minerals. But what is important to note about Kazakhstan been mining and metallurgy country for decades and decades and decades. In actual fact, the first industrial-sized smelter was built in 1928. So we're a country with metallurgical history that expands almost 100 years now. Number 11 in the world copper producer right now. We do have 18 out of the 34 critical materials on the European critical material list. But the key part, it is not something that is just buried in the ground. This is not mineral endowment we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that we actually produce many of them. So Kazakhstan, as a location currently, with the development of the metallurgical industry and hydrometallurgy, we actually a capable producer. I'll just give you one example. Over 20% of global aerospace grade titanium is coming from Kazakhstan right now. So, and so many other materials are produced in Kazakhstan, and I think our positioning for our country is we may not necessarily be right now technologically ready to produce, say, EV battery, but we are a very strong midstream country. And that's how we position in Kazakhstan.
Thank you very much. And we'll come back to you for more exploration of all of those themes. But thank you for that. Last but not least, Bata, who is chief economist of the EBRD. In previous existences, you were, well, you still are, an academic at Oxford University, and obviously steeped in all of these questions. When you think of critical raw materials, and you've heard what previous panelists have said, what runs through your mind?
Well, critical raw materials are a great opportunity for many of our countries of operations, not just for Kazakhstan, but also for Turkey, for Tunisia, for Morocco, for Kyrgyzstan. And EBRD can help, and that's why I'm very excited about this panel.
Great. Well, look, thank you. And we're going to move on, actually, to have a presentation now from Bata, who's got all the stats and data about this question. So do you want to be able to just talk us through your kind of conclusions, your findings? So that'll give us a nice template to work from for this discussion.
Well, thank you, David. So let me share with you some of the findings from our latest transition report. So if I may get the slides on the screen. As you may know, production of an electric car requires 6 to 7 times as much in terms of mineral inputs as production of a combustion engine car. It's lithium that's often mentioned, but it's graphite that's mentioned less frequently. If you think about offshore wind energy, it's also very intensive in minerals, including rare earths. That's that purple part of the graph at the end. Now, what graphite and rare earth have in common is the fact that their production is actually fairly concentrated globally. A lot of that production takes place in China. Now, graphite was in the news last year because of export restrictions introduced by China in retaliation for the US CHIPS Act. If I may get next slide, please. Now, so let me show you who mines and who produces some of those critical raw materials. So when you look at lithium, you see that mining takes place in Australia and Chile. These are two big locations for lithium mining, though of course ownership of mines is actually more diversified. But then look at processing, look at the prominence of China, at the concentration of processing that takes place in China. And actually globally, it's not only that production is concentrated. It's actually half of global exports of lithium are under some form of export restrictions. Next slide, please. Now, look at graphite. Graphite has more diversified mining. We still see that many countries buy processed graphite from China, including North America. Now, when you think about these critical raw materials, the question is, what would happen if the world were to split into two blocks? And we actually did this exercise in our transition report. We looked at mines globally, we looked at who owns them, and then we said, if the world were to split into the Western bloc and another bloc, along the lines of voting at the United Nations, who would own what? And what you see is that the West would own only 1/10 of reserves, of known reserves of rare earth, and only about 1/3 of known reserves of graphite. Next slide, please. Now, why is this worrisome? It's worrisome because as we see increase in geopolitical tensions, we are likely to see proliferation of export restrictions on critical raw materials. What you see on this graph is a broader category, critical products, which include semiconductors, PPP equipment. But you see that in the last few years, there was a huge increase in export restrictions, and now about 1/3 of global trade in critical products is subject to some export restrictions. And an export restriction can be introduced at the stroke of a pen, while developing a mine from the time you know that some reserves exist to the time you're producing takes about 16 years. So the message I want to leave you with is that proliferation of geopolitical tensions can endanger the success of green transition.
Bata, thank you very much for spelling all that out so graphically. And of course, we had President Biden, with a stroke of a pen, adding tariffs to Chinese products. So I guess that's part of and that is designed to shore up American producers of EVs in particular. Commissioner, building on that theme, how do you think this through? I mean, looking at those very dramatic graphs showing, and you talked about the concentration of supply and processing. What's the EU's ambition and hope to try to overcome that?
Well, indeed, we share those concerns. It's clear that we are currently in a world which is geopolitically more conflictual, and we see different trade and investment barriers increasing. So this is certainly a cause of concern. And also, just to confirm what was just said, in the European Union's critical or raw material strategy, our assessment is that by 2030, by implementing our strategy, we'll be able to source domestically 10% of the minerals which we need, which means 90% will help to source outside the European Union. Correspondingly, we are now working very intensively on having this network of different partnerships, different forms of engagement on building these mutually beneficial cooperations. So all our modern trade agreements or modernized trade agreements have raw materials chapters, including the one with Chile. It was one mentioned just in the context of lithium. We are engaging in strategic partnership with critical minerals, including, for example, with Kazakhstan. We recently, together with US, we set the Mineral Security Partnership Forum with the same concept. So it's clear that this will require serious work and engagement to ensure security of supply of those minerals, and diversification for this is key. And also another aspect is that this partnership needs to be mutually beneficial, also helping resource-rich countries attract investment not only in extraction but also in processing, in a sense to have more value added out of the minerals which these countries are possessing.
Thanks for that. And Minister Shalapayev, for a country like Kazakhstan, when you hear about this search for new partnerships by the EU, this quest to find other sources to, if you like, break the concentration of supply, that I guess represents a huge opportunity for you.
It is absolutely right. It is a great opportunity, but I think what we have been discussing with our European and other partners across the spectrum of consumers of the critical materials, I think one of the advantages of Kazakhstan in this specific market is, yes, there is a mineral endowment. That is correct. We have been blessed with a lot of resources. I think we have evolved our mining code sufficiently enough to be relatively modern. It's modeled on Australian and Canadian ones. I think we are, as a jurisdiction, becoming a lot more attractive for people to come in. So we are, of course, willing to work with our partners, but we're not sitting still. We're trying to develop our own soft infrastructure and hard infrastructure to be able to accommodate those investments into the both mining and processing of the critical materials.
So that's a process that's happening now.
That is exactly the point. And I think for us, it's also important. Kazakhstan's been a very reliable partner in the energy market. So, and reliability now matters more than the price. And I think in the uranium market, where we have a very substantial global market share, in the oil market, we're a major producer, we've shown to our partners both in EU and outside of the EU that we can be relied upon as a supplier. And I think that's the kind of where the advantages of Kazakhstan are coming through, and that's why we have such a productive dialogue with our partners.
And clearly, as you're describing, I mean, some of these processes about getting all the different types of infrastructure ready, but that doesn't happen overnight. And turning to you, Duka, with the giant OT mine that you're expanding, and you're looking to for that to be even more productive. But when you hear people say, you know, they're looking for new supplies by a certain date, I mean, in physical terms, and Bata, you touched on this, you know, you don't just start a new source of minerals overnight. Talk us through the kind of practicalities, actually, of what you're trying to do.
Yes, of course. So for OT is open pit and underground. It's an integrated mine. We have both surface operations. Underground, as I mentioned before, started in March last year. It is 1,300 meters below the surface level. So it's not a small feat by any stretch. Yeah? And just to those who are not as familiar with OT, the OT is a greenfield project. It was started in the middle of Gobi. You know, it was just a, Gobi Desert where only a few camels were roaming. So we had built the entire mine there over the last 15 years.
With a city as well, I guess, for everybody.
That is coming.
Okay.
It's coming. But it's you have to build the entire infrastructure with it. Yeah? So it's not a small feat. We were able to do so in less than a decade, and we were able to do so because of the support and partnership with the government of Mongolia. Without them, we would not have been able to do it. And it is a mega project. So for the project, the scale to come at such a short period of time, I think it's quite incredible. But as to answer your question, David, no, it's not a small feat. You start with exploration and drilling. That's where it starts, and from there on, you have to, you start building the infrastructure. You start building the operations. For us, so the surface operations has been operational for the last 10 years already. Underground only started. For us, it's very important now that we reach that, capacity. So the ramp up for the underground operations is where the focus is right now. We will be at the peak producing 500,000 tons of copper. Last year we did only 1/3 of that. So we have a big challenge ahead of us.
And just very simply, to start a new underground mine, so I understand you started with open cast and now you're working to open underground. I mean, how long does, presumably that's you mentioned a decade, I think, possibly, that you started. I mean, how long does that take to get everything in place?
I mean, yeah, you're right. It is taking us decades to do so.
Okay, okay. So I think it just frames the discussion so that I think sometimes you hear in this debate almost a suggestion you can just turn on a tap and get these things, but actually there are real obstacles. Bata, when you think about this, when you look at the charts that you laid out and these extraordinary concentrations, both in production and in processing, from your position in the EBRD, what's your take? What are the next steps?
Well, you know, the first best world would be the world of international cooperation and stable, predictable, low trade barriers, right? Unfortunately, we are not in this.
We're not in that.
We are not in that world, right? With the US announcing 100% tariff on electric vehicle, 25% tariff on lithium batteries. Now, as an economist, you know, what is very clear to me is that green transition will cost a lot of money, and many things will need to be subsidized, right? So, therefore, getting tariffs up, having export restrictions that will increase the cost of those minerals is exactly the wrong direction, because we want cheaper goods. We want easier access to goods that will move the green transition faster. And that's what worries me.
And what specifically can, for example, the EBRD or any multilateral development bank do in this context?
Well, we can certainly help countries develop their resources through cooperation with governments, through investment. But what we can also do is, you know, nudge companies towards higher standards. You know, a mine in the Czech Republic comes to mind, Chvatelice, where we invested 6 million euros, and the proceeds of our equity investments are going into a demonstration plant. That plant will take tailings from a decommissioned mine and will process them. So this is a way of demonstrating to that country, to other countries, that such projects can make economic sense.
Thank you. Commissioner, I'm just trying to wrestle in my mind with these conflicting time frames. I mean, you know, if we're entering a phase where there's a potential trade war. I read this morning in the FT that there are discussions in Brussels about what to do after the Biden tariffs and where that leaves the European Union. If we're entering that kind of era, and you're talking, did you say that you hope to get 10% of critical minerals sourced within the EU by 2030? There's a mismatch here, isn't there, in timetables?
Indeed. That's why it's important that we continue as international cooperation, and we minimize, to the extent possible, those trade conflicts, trade tensions, creation of new trade barriers. So that's why in parallel with all our work on critical minerals, and we were just discussing that indeed those things are not happening overnight. They take many years to develop. We are also engaged a lot in preserving a multilateral rules-based trading system, and we see the important role of the World Trade Organization in this regard, of other organizations. So that's clearly this basis, because at the end of the day it is going to be to everyone's benefit if we will continue international cooperation and if we will not allow this economic fragmentation to take place. And here we're not talking only about raw materials. There are estimates by the International Monetary Fund that if this economic fragmentation was to take place, meaning trade concentrating and investment along geopolitical blocks, that can result in something like 5 to 7% lower global GDP, which is equivalent of taking the combined Germany's and France's economy out of the world. So we see it has strong negative implications, with the strongest implications on developing countries. So that's a scenario we need to avoid.
And I mean, this is fascinating and difficult question of geopolitics. And I mean, Kazakhstan, you're kind of in the middle. There's all this talk of two blocks. I mean, how do you see the position of your country? I guess you're trying to be a partner to everybody, right?
I think it's a very interesting question. Look, geography dictates certain circumstances of where we are, and that is absolutely fine. But I think if we look at it from the actual factual standpoint, Kazakhstan's largest trading partner is European Union, and has been for decades. The leading FDI provider is actually the US. So we have a presence of the American companies on the ground developing some of the carbon fuel resources in the country. So, and I think for us, it is only natural that Kazakhstan has this position where we try to operate with certain openness, and everybody who is willing to work with us is coming and working with us, and it's evidenced by the numbers. There's some more topical examples. German companies searching for lithium in Kazakhstan, right? Korean companies looking at the rare earth, and the American mining funds or large mining companies investing into junior mining companies in Kazakhstan. So it's a multifaceted environment, and of course, I think having a diversified portfolio of both partners and investors is helpful.
And you referred earlier to the critical importance of trying to get all the conditions right to encourage private sector involvement. I mean, how important is it to get right that mix, public and private sector?
I think this is you hit a nail on the head here, because I'll give you an example of Kazakhstan. I don't want it to sound like a sales pitch, but I just want to make sure that Kazakhstan's been quite close about that its mineral endowment for decades. And in 2003, we opened 1.5 million square kilometers of territory for geological exploration. So it's essentially saying, okay, please come and search for things that you might find interesting.
1.5 million square.
Yeah, exactly.
That, just for the record, that's 6 times the surface area of the UK.
And that just
okay.
Yeah, thank you for putting this in perspective, right? So, and I think making sure that there's a right combination of jurisdiction that is attractive for investors and matching it with the mineral endowment that Kazakhstan has, bringing its result now. I think private investment into geology in Kazakhstan last year reached a landmark number, over $200 million of private money flowing into geological exploration. So I think fundamentally this is the steps that government should be taking to make sure that they remain relevant on the map of the critical materials.
And presumably, Bata, you see that as the way forward, in encouraging the private sector. Well, how do you describe the role of the private sector in this process of answering this geopolitical need?
You know, private sector certainly has a role to play, and we see our role as EBRD as sort of helping crowd in investment. Right? The private sector pays a lot of attention now to ESG standards, to how they are perceived by investors, by the outside world.
And we're going to come on to that subject in a little bit.
Yes. And because we have high standards, you know, we serve as a seal of approval, as we give comfort to investors that if they are investing with us, high standards are being followed.
Well, actually, you've set up the next part of this discussion beautifully, so very grateful for that. I mean, clearly what nobody wants is there to be some kind of crazy free-for-all for these critical raw materials that ends up destroying the environment, being appalling for human rights, and actually creating a a more damaging legacy than it was trying to tackle. EBRD has been very involved in working on projects to do with that. So let's take a look now with a video at what the EBRD has been doing.
The modern world can't function without the mineral products essential for everything we rely on. A 3 megawatt wind turbine requires 5 tonnes of copper wiring, 2 tonnes of rare earth elements, and 1,200 tonnes of concrete. So clearly, even if we reuse and recycle more efficiently, we're going to be relying on the mining industry for a transition into a green economy.
Mining is important and it needs to transform. We see the potential for the transformation in terms of energy consumption, safety, as well as the overall impact on the environment.
Adopting new technologies is going to assist the mining industry in meeting sustainability goals and minimising impacts to the climate.
The new autonomous drone technology allows us to scan the inaccessible mine workings. Scanning of inaccessible areas have always been a challenging task for mine surveyors. There was always some blind spots. Currently, we can cover 100% of the stope shape and get a very realistic result. The main benefit of using this technology here in Chelopech is the improved safety. Surveyors spend less time on the ground and collect a lot more data.
Augmented reality drones transformed the Chelopech mine from a low-profit operation to a robust mining project with high standards of environmental and worker safety.
Tri-generation is a cooling station. It provides ice water into the shafts and down into the mines. That then hits the heat exchangers and is blowing cold air into the areas where miners work underground. Thanks to this, the working conditions have much improved in our mines.
We are taking the heat from the underground and moving up to reuse it, for instance, for heating the buildings.
The technologies improve energy efficiency and has huge impact to the carbon footprint.
As demands for metals increases in the future and mining becomes more complex, it's essential for the mining industry to commit to resource efficiency through reducing reliance on water and non-green fuels and minimising production of waste and pollutants. EBRD enables mining companies to succeed in this manner, propelling the industry towards sustainable development at all levels.
Journalist, I've seen good examples of mining and, how can I put it, not so good examples. And fascinating to see the different examples there that were highlighted. Duka, I know that with your work at the OT mine, I mean, they mentioned water in the video, and I know that's one of the themes that you've been exploring and trying to, because mining is often very, very heavy on water use, isn't it? And I think you're in the Gobi Desert, so presumably there's an imperative there to reduce your impact.
Yes, of course, David. Water is a scarcity in Gobi Desert, so we, in building the mine, we had already, because we are so new, had an advantage to learn from the other operations and to adopt the latest technologies. Now, with that, we are now, I can proudly say that we are recycling 85% of the water through the concentrator. Yeah? This is statistics, second to none, I think, compared to other mining operations. So, and we will, we won't stop there. We will continue to explore what other areas, are there for us to improve, what new technologies are coming in that space, so that we continue to focus on the usage of water for OT.
And on environmental or broadly ESG questions, Bata mentioned, it's the private sector operators who feel the pressure from investors and I guess their consumers to do the right thing. I mean, do you sense that as well, that there is now an imperative not to cause more damage for your operations to be as sustainable as possible?
Yes, of course. So I would, I would say, so we're doing a lot of rehabilitation work. We work very closely in partnership with our Ministry of Environment to rehabilitate a lot of the areas. They're not just at OT, but elsewhere around the country. So some of the areas that were heavily impacted by artisanal mining. So we are working with the government to supporting them in reconstructing those areas. In addition, on the ESG, I would like to point out two things. First, we work extensively with the local communities because ultimately they are partners. We want to bring them along in our development journey. So we have very close partnerships with all the local communities in our area. Secondly, OT as a company, we are extensively focusing on supplier development. It's not enough for us to be producing our copper and to developing ourselves. We have to bring everybody along on the journey as well, including our suppliers. So of the 1,000 suppliers that we worked with last year, 82% are Mongolian companies. So, for them, it's usually, OT is the player, so it's very important for us. We spend significant effort in developing them, bringing them, along the safety standard, production standards, and quality standards so that they can supply not only to us, but to other mines in the country and, ultimately elsewhere as well.
So that's the S of ESG as well. From the perspective of Kazakhstan, you've described this great interest, all these private operators coming in to explore your territory. To what extent are you concerned about getting in place the right controls, the right regulations, so that you don't end up with your land being trashed in some way?
I think this is a very relevant question for Kazakhstan. I think the example that Bata gave resonated with me very strongly, because this is precisely what we're trying to do. Because we've been mining for quite a while, we have a lot of technological tailings across the country, and together with Kazakhstan Development Institution, who is partnering with EBRD on many projects in Kazakhstan, we funded essentially a project that processes technological tailings from the Soviet era, the chromium deposits, and enriches them into concentrate, and then produces ferrochromium, and then contributes to the stainless steel production, essentially. So the way we structure those projects is, when our DFIs make decisions whether to fund just the mining project or the mining project that actually has an environmental angle, we tend to prioritize the environmental ones. Our environmental code is quite robust in terms of the requirements of what people need to do. The other threshold that we put in front of people to make sure a very responsible operations is we actually have rehabilitation deposits or insurance. So any person who does either the geological work or the mining work has to either deposit up front or actually insure the rehabilitation risks. So that's part of the platform that we're working on. But because the territory is so large, we do have sometimes what I would call basically administration problem. So we need to administer all those risks. But for that, we're trying to use modern technology, satellite imaging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think fundamentally for us, it is one of the biggest discussions with both local population and the mining companies is what the environmental impact would be. And sometimes it gets a priority over the economic interest in this project.
I mean, it's interesting, in my experience, I have seen one or two examples, I say the not so good ones, where operators in different countries, for whatever reason, went bust and then weren't fulfilling the remediation obligations that they'd signed up to because they just weren't there anymore. What kind of measures can you put in place to prevent that kind of thing, to make sure the work is done?
Let me just take the geological exploration as an example. Typically, if you apply for a license in Kazakhstan, the license is 5 years. But what you do, you buy the environmental remediation insurance for the 5-year period upfront. Yes, from one side, it may seem as a barrier to the to entry, but for us, it does ensure a seriousness of the investor. It does ensure their good intentions when it comes to the geological work. So this is one of the barriers. And of course, I think when we come to the mining, there's a very detailed project analysis in terms of the environmental assessment and in terms of the economic assessment on the region. And there is also a social angle, because if a mining company develops a project within a certain region, there's a social obligation for the miner to actually contribute to the local economy. And I think this is happening more and more now, and the social obligations gradually increasing. Thank you.
From the point of view of thank you for all of that. From the point of view of the EU, I mean, you know, you've laid out the urgency of finding new sources of the materials themselves and of the processing. Is there how do you strike a balance to make sure that in this rush to find new sources, you don't cause more harm?
Indeed, in my introductory remarks, I already outlined that is one of the key parameters when we are engaging in those activities, that they have to be done with respect to labor and environmental rights and with good governance standards. So that's an indispensable part of this operation. In projects which we support in one form or another, including, for example, through EBRD. But also we closely monitor what private operators are doing. As you know, one of the, I think, the first piece of legislation in the European Union related to corporate sustainability, to respect of labor and environmental rights was conflict minerals regulation, dealing exactly with those topics. Right now, we are finalizing the work on corporate sustainability due diligence directive, which will also help to ensure that that companies need to ensure that they, in their supply chains, are not sourcing materials or components, again, with labor or environmental rights regulation. We recently also finalized the work on forced labor regulation, making sure that we are not sourcing goods to the single market, which have components of forced labor. So it's not only something which is specific in our case to our raw materials strategy or raw materials act. It is something where we have already quite a good body of horizontal regulations in place.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you who've submitted questions. And I'm going to fold one of them into a question to you, Bata. What is the topic really of recycling, of circularity, which I know is the theme for the EBRD? How, in the context of minimizing environmental damage, it would sound completely logical to maximize the amount of these materials that's recycled and enshrined in a circular economy. Is that something that you're pushing, you're promoting, you're trying to encourage thinking on?
Well, thank you for this question. Actually, the project in Kvatelice that I mentioned, that's a project which is unique in its waste-to-value recycling, right? It's sort of reprocessing those tailings from a decommissioned mine. This project has a remediation component. If you think about what we do is, by the virtue of having done many mining projects, we accumulated knowledge that also allows us help governments think about regulation. Not all countries are as experienced as Kazakhstan in this area. Also, we were talking about ESG and pressure firms are facing from investors. But of course, not all investors face the same pressures, and not all investors are equally want to take responsibility for the impact of their project. So we would like to think that our involvement increases the standards, meaning that by nudging our customers, our clients, we make these projects better than they would have been in the absence of our involvement.
But you can insist on certain standards, can you?
We insist on certain standards.
But then can you then police them?
We do our best.
Okay.
You know, nobody is perfect, but we do our best. But look, there is also another aspect. The way we think about our mission, its transition impact, is, you know, we want our impact to go beyond a single project, right? We want our projects to demonstrate how to do things, to show other countries that doing good things is commercially viable, and we want these projects to be replicated somewhere else.
I mean, a really interesting question that's come up, and just to feed it into a broader point about how you incentivize private sector operators to maintain the highest possible standards in an industry whose reputation hasn't always been sort of blame-free. I was thinking of you, Duka, here with this one. I mean, we heard it was yesterday in the Sustainability Awards a company making use of green steel. It seems to me that there's an emerging market for people prepared to pay a bit extra to have a really green product. Does that kind of incentive play for Rio Tinto in Mongolia? I mean, will you find that the people you're selling the copper to might themselves be happy to really encourage you to be more sustainable?
Well, I really hope so, because OT has a copper mark. So copper mark is something that, you know, we apply for, and we show, you know, these are the kind of standards we're applying in our operations at all levels, not just, you know, ESG. It's for, you know, how do we treat our people, environment, communities, etc. And so far, it has not come through, translated into higher prices yet, but I'm hoping it will, you know. But we do it because it's important to us. We believe this is the right thing to do. I think from Rio Tinto's perspective, I cannot talk to them, but, you know, they are, you know, held to those standards by the shareholders as well. You were asking Bata whether, you know, EBRD is able to police it. Believe me, they do. I can assure you they do. So, you know, we are, you know, held to those standards by our lenders, by our shareholders, and we truly believe that that's the right thing to do. So, you know, it has not come translated into higher prices yet, but hopefully in the future it will.
Let's, in the context of, I mentioned the climate imperative, the urgency of the net zero transition. We began with brief remarks. I need these to be really brief because we're into the last few minutes here. Just share a thought, what you would like to see cast ahead 5 years' time from the point of view of Kazakhstan. Let's just go along the line here, but really a brief remark.
I'll try to be as brief as possible. I think we need to be mindful of the fact that we perhaps maybe underestimated the cost, right? And they underestimated the time which it will take to complete the transition. I think we need to be very open and honest with ourselves as to how we're going to achieve that, right? So, and to us, fundamentally, yes, as a country that relies on mining for 10% of its GDP, it's probably a good development that the demand on copper, anybody can check a copper price now, is very big. But I think trying to do it in a sustainable way and trying to pace ourselves in the right way is an important aspect of this development. So otherwise it will become a race to something that that might be a very difficult to achieve while having in mind all the environmental, social, and governance standards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for brevity as well. Duka, 5 years' time, the underground facility will be functioning. Where would you like to be in 5 years with this?
Well, I guess I would just mention two things there. For us, it's really absolutely important for us to continue to develop our people. We, as the OTs, developing the underground mine, we are losing our people everywhere else. Now our staff are becoming very popular, so we need to continue to develop the next
generation. You've trained them so well that other companies are
absolutely.
poaching.
Not just in Mongolia,
Yeah.
mostly overseas. Right. And the second thing I would mention is, we cannot continue to operate and to reach the levels we want to reach without the government support. So that is absolutely critical.
Thank you. Okay, from the EU perspective, again, brief as possible.
Well, as there is a saying, implementation is key. So right now, we in last few years have developed a whole range of new partnerships, have come forward with a whole range of new initiatives. What is important for the next 5 years that we are actually seeing them through, that we are seeing them actually materializing in practical, concrete projects on the ground.
Okay. Commendably brief and fascinating. Thank you. Beata.
I hope that we can stop the process of fragmentation of the global economy, because fragmentation will slow down green transition. And green transition, the climate emergency, should be our overarching goal, dealing with that.
But I'm just going to throw in a supplementary, because you laid out so clearly the risk of a two-block world, and we've discussed the implications of that. What's your plan B if the two blocks emerge?
Well, I hope that there will remain connector countries. That's a new term that was coined by the IMF. Countries that will pursue multi-vector policy and that will serve as a conduit of trade between the two blocks.
We're going to see a bit of connector country action actually very shortly. I'm going to invite everybody here in the room to stay on now that we've come to the end of the session to witness the signing of a new connection between the EBRD and Kazakhstan. But for those of you watching online, this is the end of our session. So would you all just join me in thanking our panelists?